I like Dungeons and Dragons, you like Dungeons and Dragons, and we both might like anime. So great! What do we do with this overlap in interest? As I've gotten to play more D&D and have become obsessed with Baldur's Gate 3, I have found myself craving more fantasy stories that felt like they could take place in D&D or a similar world. Fantasies that reveled in their magic but wasn't an isekai series. I love isekai stories as much as the next guy, but sometimes I want a story about people in a world they're familiar with. I want escapism through feeling like I'm in a familiar setting, not escapism through some guy being transported to a magical world. There's a specific vibe in world setting that I tend to associate with Dungeons & Dragons. High fantasy, vaguely medieval, typically consisting of a group setting out on an adventure together, fighting mythical monsters or searching for a grand treasure. One Piece. I'm literally describing One Piece. Okay, that's a little bit of a joke, but honestly, a One Piece D&D campaign would go hard. Don't mind me, I'm just DMing my DM. But out of all of the fantasy anime I've seen, there's one series that perfectly encapsulates a D&D experience, and that is Dungeon Meshi, or Delicious in Dungeon. And fun fact, the creator of the series, Ryoko Kyui, started doing Baldur's Gate 3 fan art and playing the game as the manga was coming to an end, leading to the false rumor that she ended Dungeon Meshi to play Baldur's Gate, which, yeah, me too. So real for that. The world mechanics of Dungeon Meshi match D&D in a way that I have never seen before in anime. And in that regard, it's seemingly one of a kind, at least in recent years. I'll admit I have not seen every single anime that ever aired. Normally, fantasy anime of this type are modeled after JRPGs, which to some extent can share a lot of similarities with D&D, especially considering that it seems to be a common idea that JRPGs were initially based on D&D. I've not dug deep enough to fully verify this information, but it is a reoccurring thing that I keep seeing when looking up fantasy anime and people talking about the inspiration. But the similarities in world building, combat systems, and whatnot are pretty decent indicators that at the very least some things in JRPGs were inspired, or all fantasy shares similar roots in something else, which could be a possibility. Honestly, that could be a whole deep dive in and of itself that I have not started researching yet, but it could be fun. However, with Dungeon Meshi, there is a lot more direct parallels with D&D, and it's supposedly inspired by Wizardry RPG, which was inspired by D&D. It also helps that Ryoko Kyui has shown love for many RPG games, even some with D&D roots, specifically Baldur's Gate. She's showed interest in all three of the games, it's not just the new one. And there's also a lot of uncanny similarities between Dungeon Meshi and the modules Waterdeep, Dragon Heist, and Dungeon of the Mad Mage. However, Dungeon Meshi was created before these modules, but I do think the similarities between the two showcase just how steeped in Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Meshi really is. The basic premise of Dungeon Meshi, though, is that this adventuring party loses a fight against a dragon in the dungeon. One of the members gets eaten as the rest of the party escapes. Her brother and the few that remained in the party go back to save her, but they have no money and no supplies, so they end up eating monsters in the dungeon in order to survive. It's a silly premise, and the main character Laios is overly enthusiastic about this. He's lovingly referred to as the Autism Knight online, and I love that for him.
The basilisk makes you appreciate the things about a plain old chicken that make it special. A simple combo, but it really makes you think. By the way, here's a fact about the cockatrice and basilisk. Same family, different species. It's been my dream to do a taste test between the two.
You got some weird dreams.
Dungeon Meshi has really cool world building, and there are some fun things that I've never really seen in fantasy before. Like, for example, if you die in the dungeon, something about the way that the dungeon is set up keeps your soul tethered to your body, so you were able to be brought back to life. So while dying will set you back and can be a problem, it's not the end of the world if you die in the dungeon, but it is not ideal. But that kind of like makes the stakes feel a little wonky. but the series is still able to make things feel very, like, threatening, with the idea knowing that, hey, if it really goes wrong, maybe they'll be revived later. As the story goes on, behind the Monster of the Week format that the series takes, we become acquainted with the world and the politics that rule things behind the scenes. As Laios and the gang work to save Fallon, we meet an array of other characters, each with their own motivations for exploring or living in the dungeon. It's mentioned a lot early on, but doesn't become more prevalent until a bit later in the series, but the dungeon that our party's exploring was crafted by the Mad Mage, and it's said that anyone who takes on the dungeon and finds the Golden Kingdom will receive treasure and power, becoming the next leader of said kingdom. There's also mysterious secrets to be uncovered, but that's not really brought up until you're halfway through the anime, but I don't think mentioning that there's things coming is much of a spoiler. So this video is very spoiler-free, as much as it can be. The plot is a little bit of a slow burn, at least in the anime, but the characters are so charming that just taking the time to really get to know them as we go through this dungeon together makes for a wonderful experience. By the time I was starting to get to the more serious plot progression, I felt like I'd been adventuring with our main party for a while now and knew them pretty well. Dungeon Meshi is a very character-driven story, so without any spoilers, let me introduce you to the main ensemble cast.
I didn't get to finish singing it again. I even learned it all, too.
First up, we have Laios. He is, for all intents and purposes, the leader of the group, the main-ish character. He's a human fighter. They're called tallmen, but he's basically human. And he is very, very enthusiastic about monsters. It's his special interest. There's also a lot of strong evidence for Laios being autistic, with his special interest in monsters, his experiences with the world around him mirroring the autistic experience pretty well, right down to not picking up social cues and being a little bit ostracized for it. And he also stims, so everyone I know that is autistic has claimed him as one of us. He's a very sweet, well-meaning guy, and his weird freak tendencies are not of the sexual nature, which is a very common trope in anime that this series avoids pretty easily. It's really nice.
Why do they keep letting noobs down here? If they're that scared of walking mushrooms, they should stay out. Oh, Laios, no. No!
I think we just found our lunch.
That's gross! Ew, no! I don't wanna!
Next up is Marcille. She's got pointy ears and she is the mage of the group. Magic is kind of her whole thing, and she's also very, very motivated to save Fallon, Laios' sister, and also her best friend, girlfriend, really close friend, whatever you want to call them. It could go either way, but I don't think they're specifically canon. Marcille is very high-strung, and she gets stressed pretty easily, and she's not excited about eating the monsters, but it's kind of like the whole thing that they're doing down there. It's the only way they're going to be able to save Fallon, because they have to save her before she gets digested. So even our least willing of party members is going to put up with it because they need to save their girl. Marcille is also just like a whole mood. This girl is so stressed out and she deserves a break. I love her very much.
Better not tell him about the mimic. I know Laios and Senshi would want to eat it, which means I'll have to open the chest. No thanks. Mimics. Over the years, those bastards caused me nothing but grief.
Next up, we have Chilchuck. Chilchuck is a half-foot rogue, basically. They never specify that he's a rogue, but his specialties are lockpicking, trap, disarming, like basic rogue things. He's just a little guy, and he doesn't fight or anything. Like, he's literally just there to get people into things and to make sure they don't blow up. He's also very grumpy in a way. Like, he's very like strictly business. He likes to keep things to himself, and it's really nice to watch him grow closer with the group as they go on this journey, because it's that trope of a character who's a little bit rough around the edges, softening up as the series goes on. He's also a middle-aged man with 3 kids and a wife. I don't think it's a spoiler to mention that, because I think it heightens the enjoyment of the series knowing from the get-go that that is a middle-aged man with children. I knew that before I started watching the series, and it greatly improved my view of this character and the situations he finds himself in.
Go and take a seat right there. You're probably at the age where you're gonna start showing interest in certain things, so you're gonna need to have some good knowledge about them.
What's that mean?
Let's just say that humans also have a stamen and pistol.
Those are the 3, like, core party members, or the ones that were previously in a party before the series starts. The rest of their party, we do meet later on, but they've left, so I'm just gonna leave them out of this little character overview.
Excuse me, folks. A scorpion hot pot, eh? Can't say I agree with your method.
Who are you?
These have to be prepared for cooking. You have to chop off the pincers, head, legs, and tail. Especially the tail. Gives you the run something fierce.
Finally, but most importantly, we have Senshi, who is a dwarf chef, basically. He joins the group after the fact, when they meet him in the dungeon, and he is just very passionate about nutrition. He has his reasons, but I'm not going to say them here because it's kind of a spoiler. But Senshi is just a very sweet dwarf who loves to cook and is very passionate about the ecosystem within the dungeon and making sure everything is in balance. He is going on this journey mostly to, like, I think he's lonely, so he's working with Laios, Marcel, and Shiltruck just to have some companionship in his life, but I think he also finds joy in helping others and cooking for others and sharing his knowledge about what you can and can't eat in the dungeon and the best ways to prepare said dungeon food. I just really like Senshi. Shiltruck is my favorite, but Senshi is a really, really close second, but I'm also obsessed with Fallon. I know I've been mentioning Fallon a lot. I've not properly introduced you. Fallon is Laios' sister. She's also a tall man human. She is the equivalent of the cleric for the party, and she's just really cool. I like her a lot. I also just love characters that haunt the narrative. So if you also like characters that haunt the narrative, you're gonna love Dungeon Meshi. I also really enjoy how Dungeon Meshi does not fall back on character tropes as heavily as some animes do. I am fully aware that this criticism mainly lies within, like, popular shonen titles and isekais and things that generally, if you complain about this, people are going to tell you to broaden your horizons and, for the love of God, watch something other than shonen isekai, and I totally get it. I watch way more than shonen isekai, but it is still nice to see something that would appeal to the same group of people, subvert all of these tropes. Also, fan service pretty much is carried solely by Senshi. He is the only character put through the trenches of standard anime fan service, and the contrast of that compared to what's normalized in anime and manga is honestly really comical. Ah yes, all of the panty shots should go to the grown-ass hairy dwarven man, who is more beard than body most of the time. I do want to note that all of the Senshi fan service is never painted in a way that's overtly sexual, nor is it really made into anything by the characters in the show. It just happens as a joke for the audience, and maybe even some sort of critique on actual fan service in other animes. It's refreshing to those who have grown tired of or were never interested in the over-sexualization of teen girl characters that plagues a lot of anime. And yes, I'm fully aware a lot of popular anime is shonen, meaning it's targeted towards teen boys, so it makes sense that the characters who are shown off like that are teen girls, because you would assume that teen boys would be interested in teen girls in that kind of way. That's fine, but it happens a lot, and I know American audiences are kind of sick of it, but also American audiences are like a lot of grown adults watching things intended for teenagers and then getting annoyed. Either way though, this also makes Dungeon Meshi a lot easier to recommend to people who have not been watching anime for over a decade. This is kind of a joke. It's a common complaint about a lot of series that there's at least one thing that makes it less palatable for people who are not used to the weird things that commonly pop up in anime. For example, Spy Family is a cute, wholesome anime about a found family, but it's hard to recommend because one of the main characters, her brother, is literally in love with her. Her blood brother is obsessed with her. And most people are not willing to overlook silly incest jokes to enjoy an otherwise amazing and wholesome series. Which, fair, I'm not saying you have to, but that's kind of like the thing I'm talking about when I say sometimes it's hard to recommend anime to people. Since this video is made with the intent of convincing people to watch the show, I'm not going to delve too much into the story or its characters. I may do that at a later date after reading the manga, but I do want to say that the story is really, really good, and the series progresses pretty naturally from a silly Monster of the Week cooking show to something with an overarching plot beyond going to save Fallon. You're just gonna have to trust me on it and watch it. Season 1 of the anime just wrapped up a couple weeks ago, making it the perfect time to get invested in the show. You can watch at your own pace, binge all 24 episodes in a day, it's up to you, really. The manga is also now completely finished, coming in at 14 volumes total. However, the final volume will not be released in English until July of this year, but if you're watching this video after July 23rd, then all of the volumes are available to buy in English. Also, Season 2 has already been announced as in production, so like that's coming, and given the pacing of Season 1, Season 2 will most likely cover what's left of the manga, so you're gonna get the whole story in the anime. So if you don't like reading manga, but you also don't want to be left hanging to dry, you're not gonna have to worry about that. Dungeon Meshi has easily become one of my favorite series and my favorite anime of the year so far. It scratches the same itch that Baldur's Gate does, and most people that I know that like one usually like the other as well. The Venn diagram of Dungeon Meshi enjoyers and Baldur's Gate players is basically a circle, so you should watch it. Also, please let me know if you'd like a deeper look into the series. I've started reading the manga and would love to do a deeper analysis if that's something we'd be interested in here. I can say that Null and I, you guys remember Null, we've done Black Butler stuff together like a while ago. We have been talking about making silly Dungeon Meshi videos here and there, so if you want more Dungeon Meshi, it's definitely coming, and if you don't, I'm very sorry. But I love Dungeon Meshi. I think you guys would love Dungeon Meshi. I think we could have a great thing going here. Dungeon Meshi is a very silly series in tone, but it does have more darker and serious undertones. So it's got everything. Like the full human emotion spectrum. It's got it all. Anyway, that's been my short little spiel on Dungeon Meshi. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. You need to watch Dungeon Meshi, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!